In this Photoshop tutorial, I'll be showing you how to take a full-size, full-res image, something that might come straight off of your DSLR, and how to shrink that down to make it more easy to manage via email, or if you wanted to put it up online, make it quicker to download for users. When you download a high-res image, or say you take a photo on your digital SLR, it'll be very big in file size. If I get info on this photo, you can see that it's 12.1 megabytes. And depending on your camera, this can be even larger. One file of 12.1 megabytes isn't too bad, but if you had 20 shots, say from an event that you were taking photos at, that's 20 times 12 megabytes, which is upward of 250 megabytes. Say you wanted to send that to a client or send that to somebody else who was at the event, that will take you a long time to upload, and you'll probably have to use something like Dropbox. The odds are, if you're uploading this to a website to use, or you're sending it to somebody else, the website or the person doesn't actually often need the full-size image. If I open this image in Photoshop, you'll notice up here in the view percentage, we're at 16.7%. If I zoom up, this is Command plus and minus on Mac or Control plus and minus on PC. I'll zoom up until this hits 100%. We have 100% here, and you'll see that the image is really big. It's a high quality image and lots of pixels. And now, judging by this, not many people are going to actually want an image this big sent to them, and this big of an image on a website is probably wasting your bandwidth and your space. There's one easy way in Photoshop to change the size of an image. Go to File, Export, and select Export As. This pop-up will appear, and it gives you an approximate size of the original image, 12.2 megabytes. It gives you a percentage view of the actual image, currently at 16.67%. I can click plus and minus to zoom in, but I'll make that fit the screen. And over here we have some parameters. So this is our original image, and let's change one of these parameters and see if we can change the file size. Up here, make sure your format is set to JPEG, and let's change the quality down to 50%. Type in 50 and hit return or enter. After a second or so, you'll notice that Photoshop edits the approximate size. Now we're down to 2.4 megabytes. So it was 12, now it's 2, so we've shaved off about 10 megabytes. And you'll see that it's still the full size image. What you might be able to see here is up in the sky, there's a little bit of these waves appearing. If I go down to 10%, you'll notice that there's a lot more waves in the sky. This is how Jpeg Compression works. It edits and changes some of the pixels to make the image still look good, but be much smaller. Now we're down to 936 kilobytes, which is about 1/12 of the original size. But this is where you want to keep an eye out on how the image is degrading. I don't like those lines in the blue sky, so I'm going to experiment, and let's go back up to 50%. The lines are much more minimal, and I have 2.4 megabytes over here. So all I've changed is the quality of my JPEG. I've kept the full size of the image, and I'm ready to save that. Export all, and I'll save that into the same folder, and I'll call this Sand Tropical Beach 50% full size. So that means I've changed the quality to 50%, but the image is still the full size. I'll click Save, and it brings me back to my original image. So I'll hide Photoshop, and let's look at the difference. The original image here, 12.1 megabytes, and the next image, 2.4. If I open these up to view them at 100%, this is the original image, and this is the compressed image. And you'll notice the only difference is a little bit up here on the top right of the sky. If I zoom in, so they're about the same size, I'm toggling between both of the images here. You barely notice a difference. So if you compare the original and the edited version, and there's barely a discernible difference, that means you've done the exporting really well. You've shaved off 10 megabytes, and you can barely tell the difference. So let's go back to Photoshop, and we'll try it one more time. Let's go File, Export, Export As. Our settings are still here, I'll put this back to 100%. The second change you can do in this feature is to change the actual size of the image. To change this, go to Image Size. I'll change this to be 50%. You'll notice it shrinks down the image, and already we have a much smaller file size. It was 12, now it's 4. Down the bottom, I'm going to click and zoom up. We're at 50%, and the image is still really large. If I go to 100, you can see that there's a lot of image. But say I'm going to use this on a website, and I don't need it to be full size. Maybe this is how big it will be on the website. So I don't need the image to be physically any bigger than this. So because I'm at 50% here, and this is how big it will be, I'm going to change this. Let's try 25%. And click up to 100. We're at 100%. Here's my image here. So that's actually going to be as big physically as I need it. We're at 1 megabyte, so let's experiment with the quality. Let's take this down to be 80%. Now we're down to 500 kilobytes, half a megabyte, and that looks really good. I'll click Export All, and this time I'm going to call it 80% for the quality and 25% for the size. Click Save, and I'll hide Photoshop. So if I check the file size of this third file, you'll notice it 556 kilobytes, which is actually 1/24th the original size. And if I open the image, the quality is really nice. Now this is the physical size of the image. If I zoom in, you'll notice it starts to pixelate. So this image will be useful if you're just wanting to send somebody a photo for them to look at and not print out, or if you're using it online and this is the physical size that you'd like it to be on the web page. But if you're sending somebody the full res image, and they possibly might want to print it out, this is our first edit, and this is the actual size of the image. It's much larger than our second smaller edit. I'll click File, Export, Export As. So the second modifier that I use in Export As is the scale. This image is currently 16%, which means it's actually much larger in real life. You can see that it's huge. We don't need it to be that big. Say we're sending this photo to somebody just to share some holiday snaps, or we're wanting to put this photo up on a website. We don't want our users to have to download such a huge image. Our image may only need to be this big on screen. So let's change our scale. Let's take our scale down to be 50%. Photoshop will automatically scale. Let's zoom up and have a look. This is how big I'd like my image to be, but it's still only at 33%, which means we can go down even smaller with the scale. Let's try 20%. Still a little bit smaller. Let's go 15. That looks about right. Let's say I want to put this on my website, and this will be the size of the top banner. So we've set our scale to 15%, and already you can see that our image size is down to 420 kilobytes. So because we've shrunk down the image, we're saving a lot of file space. I'm going to change my quality up here to 50%. You can see now we're down to 88 kilobytes. You can notice that there's a little bit of pixelation around some of the details here. To show that even further, let's go down to 10%. You can see at 10%, we have a lot of pixelation around the sky and around the palm fronds. We're down to 36 kilobytes, which is a really small file size, but this is the balance that you want to strike when you're changing your quality. You want to make sure that you're adjusting the quality to try and find that sweet spot where the eye doesn't really notice that the image has been compressed. So I'll go back up to 50%. Still a little bit of pixelation in the corner here. Let's go back up to 80%. That's brought a lot more detail back in the palm front here. I'm happy with that. We're at 214 kilobytes. I'll click Export All. This one was 80% and 15% size. Now if I go back to my folder, the size of this third image, 217 kilobytes. So you can see that this is much smaller than 12.1. If I open my third image, you can see that physically this is the size of the image. If I zoom in, you'll notice that it starts to pixelate. But for this use, this image size is fine. If I'm just wanting to share this photo, This saves the user having to download 12 megabytes, and they only need to download 217 kilobytes. So if I had 20 photos, instead of it being 200 plus megabytes, the total will be about 5 megabytes. If I open the first image that I edited, you'll see that it's much larger. If I go to the full size, you'll see that there's a lot of pixel data there. So this original edit is really good if you're going to print out a photo, or if you want to send it to somebody and send them the full res image, but they don't need the full file size as well. If you have, say, 20 photos from a single shoot that you're wanting to export, take note of the quality and the scale, and you can use that as a guide to apply to all the rest of the images. You may have to adjust them slightly depending on what the detailing in the photo is, but this can be a guide to keep your consistency. So when using export as, first work out what the end use of your image will be, if it needs to be printed, if it's just on a website, or is just to be sent to somebody and only needs to be small. Keep that size in mind, and adjust your scale, and then combine that with the quality to find a balance where your image shrinks but doesn't lose too much quality. And you can also decrease the file size by a lot.